Section 19 of The Luck of Roaring Camp and Other Sketches. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by David Wales. The Luck of Roaring Camp and Other Sketches by Bret Harte. Chapter 19. Boonder. I never knew how the subject of this memoir came to attach himself so closely to the affections of my family. He was not a prepossessing dog. He was not a dog of even average birth and breeding. His pedigree was involved in the deepest obscurity. He may have had brothers and sisters, but in the whole range of my canine acquaintance, a pretty extensive one, I never detected any of Boonder's peculiarities in any other of his species. His body was long, and his forelegs and hind legs were very wide apart, as though Nature originally intended to put an extra pair between them, but had unwisely allowed herself to be persuaded out of it. This peculiarity was annoying on cold nights, as it always prolonged the interval of keeping the door open for Boonder's ingress long enough to allow 2 or 3 dogs of a reasonable length to enter. Boonder's feet were decided. His toes turned out considerably, and in repose his favorite attitude was the first position of dancing. Add to a pair of bright eyes, ears that seemed to belong to some other dog, and a symmetrically pointed nose that fitted all apertures like a pass key, and you have Boonder as we knew him. I am inclined to think that his popularity was mainly owing to his quiet impudence. His advent in the family was that of an old member who had been absent for a short time, but had returned to familiar haunts and associations. In a Pythagorean point of view, this might have been the case, but I cannot recall any deceased member of the family who was in life partial to bone burying, though it might be post mortem a consistent amusement. And this was Boonder's great weakness. He was at first discovered coiled up on a rug in an upper chamber, and was the least disconcerted of the entire household. From that moment Boonder became one of its recognized members, and privileges, often denied the most intelligent and valuable of his species, were quietly taken by him and submitted to by us. Thus, if he were found coiled up in a clothes basket, or any article of clothing assumed locomotion on its own account, we only said, "Oh, it's Boonder," with a feeling of relief that it was nothing worse. I have spoken of his fondness for bone burying. It could not be called an economical faculty, for he invariably forgot the locality of his treasure, and covered the garden with purposeless holes. But although the violets and daisies were not improved by Boonder's gardening, no one ever thought of punishing him. He became a synonym for fate, a Boonder to be grumbled at, to be accepted philosophically, but never to be averted. But although he was not an intelligent dog, nor an ornamental dog, he possessed some gentlemanly instincts. When he performed his only feat, begging upon his hind legs, and looking remarkably like a penguin, ignorant strangers would offer him crackers or cake, which he didn't like, as a reward of merit. Boonder always made a great show of accepting the proffered dainties, and even made hypocritical contortions as if swallowing, but always deposited the morsel when he was unobserved in the first convenient receptacle, usually the visitor's overshoes. In matters that did not involve courtesy, Boonder was sincere in his likes and dislikes. He was instinctively opposed to the railroad. When the track was laid through our street, Boonder maintained a defiant attitude toward every rail as it went down, and resisted the cars shortly after to the fullest extent of his lungs. I have a vivid recollection of seeing him, on the day of the trial trip, come down the street in front of the car, barking himself out of all shape, and thrown back several feet by the recoil of each bark. But Boonder was not the only one who has resisted innovations, or has lived to see the innovation prosper and even crush. But I am anticipating. Boonder had previously resisted the gas, but although he spent one whole day in angry altercation with the workmen, leaving his bones unburied and bleaching in the sun, somehow the gas went in. The Spring Valley water was likewise unsuccessfully opposed, and the grading of an adjoining lot was for a long time a personal matter between Boonder and the contractor. These peculiarities seemed to evince some decided character and embody some idea. A prolonged debate in the family upon this topic resulted in an addition to his name. We called him Boonder the Conservative, with a faint acknowledgment of his fateful power. But although Boonder had his own way, his path was not entirely of roses. Thorns sometimes pricked his sensibilities. When certain minor chords were struck on the piano, Boonder was always painfully affected and howled a remonstrance. If he were removed for company's sake to the back yard, at the occurrence of the provocation he would go his whole length, which was something, to improvise a howl that should reach the performer. But we got accustomed to Boonder, and as we were fond of music the playing went on. One morning Boonder left the house in good spirits, with his regular bone in his mouth, and apparently the usual intention of burying it. The next day he was picked up lifeless on the track, run over apparently by the first car that went out of the depot. End of Chapter 16. End of The Luck of Roaring Camp and Other Sketches by Bret Harte.